leading up into an estate process. But if there's one message that you need to take home out of that, and you just need to maybe identify 5 messages in the whole presentation. But the one that stands out for me, which should be a shock to you, is that none of you or the heirs in an estate can get any benefit until the 2-year period is over. That's an important, frightening thought. What do you do in the case in the interim when, if you don't have the resources, or you are forced to use your resources from that point of view? And that should create a debate tonight at home, in the bedroom, to say, listen, what really happens? I mean, a simple thing like, what happens to the insurance of the house? If the bank account is frozen and the insurance policy per premium is not paid, the insurance policy lapses, and if you have a default, such as a fire or something a month later, and you have not renewed it, what are the implications? Who knows what to do in that situation? You are the second person on a medical aid plan. What happens to you if the premium is not paid because the bank account is frozen? And you'll hear from our colleague who we've got from our Baraka Bank to explain to you what happens when they get a new and somebody dies, really, and so on. But let's proceed. We need to into the real meaty stuff. I'm going to be covering these areas. So in South Africa, there are 2 ways you can own an asset. You either own an asset in your personal name or in the trust. Now, in your personal name, you need a will. And by the way, we will make these slides available. We will arrange, Rumana and ourselves, if you give in your email address, we will make the slides available for you. So it's quite take comfort that you will have it and you can follow the talk. When you have assets in a personal name, a will is an instrument how the assets move based on the various legislation. The will is the only instrument how the asset moves from one to another. Simple estate is a car. What did the will say? How must the car be transferred? If you die without a will, you go through the intestate rules. All the intestate rules says this is a fixed formula how it's going to happen. You have no say on the matter. That's what it means, really, effectively. Okay? So you either have a will or you don't have a will, and you have a lot of complications and problems. But in the South African context, you can have assets in your personal name or in the trust. So most of you, many of you will hear that your husband says some of your assets are in the trust. That's fine. A will does not apply to a trust. A will only applies to personal assets. Do not let anybody tell you that the will instructions is applicable to a trust. A trust needs its own application of rules when the planner dies. Most trusts are most neglectful in that area. So a trust will say, we are all beneficiaries. What happens when the principal dies? That's the question you've got to ask your spouse when he says he's got a trust ready. So as you know, I'm not going to spend time. The sources of our primary law is the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and beyond that, we have practice and knowledge of the scholars that give you analogies and come to some conclusions. And the speakers have already touched on the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ. It's an important area. No 3 nights should pass without you having a will if you've got assets to bequeath and so on. So those of you who have seen a Sharia will, it's a fairly simple will. That's the clause, believe it or not. All it says, I appoint as the heirs of my residue of my estate, the balance of my estate, my heirs in accordance with Islamic laws of succession. That's your will. What does it mean? That's the verse, that's the words that we use, and we qualify that the heirs and the proportions who are to be certified by a religious body. In other words, who gets what is to be certified by an alim? I can give you the answer, but the master of the Supreme Court that the Rumana has referred to wants a certificate by an Islamic scholar to say the mother must get 1/6 and the father must get 1/6 and the wife will get 1/8 when they are children, and the balance is shared 2-1 if there's boys to go. We know the answer. But they want that information from an alim. But the question that you should be asking yourself, why can't you really spell out that proportions? Why do you say that this is to be shared on an Islamic basis? The reason for that, and this is very important, your proportions are determined the moment the person dies, not before. Think about it. If I die now and my father's alive, you will get 1/6. My mother's alive, she'll get 1/6. These are the proportions you will get to know. My wife gets 1/8 because they are children, and my son gets the balance if I would have a son. But if my father had died just before, yesterday, then my mother gets 1/6, my wife gets the 1/8 because they are children, and my son gets a bigger share. The 1/6 falls away. You follow? So the proportions are determined the moment we talk about the deceased having passed away, at that moment who is alive. If somebody has predeceased you, they fall out of the net of inheriting, or their children do not step into their shoes. Or their children do not step into their shoes. So the verse that we refer to, and in particular in Surah Nisa, there are particularly 3 verses that we're going to look at. Now, I don't want you to be obsessed with the proportions and so on, because the proportions are very easy to work out. In the olden days, it was very difficult, because you can Google them nowadays. You could just enter the configuration of the family, and you'll say, husband has died, wife is alive, 3 children, father is alive. It gives you the answer. But I want you to get to the concept of that the proportions, the basis of the proportions is the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His infinite wisdom, must have known inheritance is going to create a lot of problems. And He spells out the proportions in the Quran. And the verse ends with, these are settled portions ordained by Allah, and Allah is knowing or wise. Similarly, the next verse also, thus it is ordained by Allah. So He must have known this area needs to be very clearly spelled out in the Quran. And there are the proportions. And this, I'm just going to use one of the translations. Allah thus directs as regards your children's inheritance, to the male a portion equal to that of 2 females. There's your 2-to-1 ratio. If only daughters, if only you have daughters, those of you who have only daughters, listen to this one. 2 or more, in other words, in relation to the deceased. In relation to the deceased now, I'm saying. If you only have 2 daughters, 2 or more, they share 2/3. They share 2/3. If only one, her share is a half. For parents, if they're alive, there's a 6 share to each. If the deceased left children, if no children and the parents are alive, and the parents are only heirs, the mother has a 1/3, and so on and so on. Now, the other important point, besides these ratios, listen to this here. It says after the payments of legacies and debts. Keep that in mind, after the payment of legacies and debts. Similarly, if you go to the next verse, it tells you again a different formulation, which I'm not going to spend time, but it says here, after payments of legacies and debts, after payments of legacies and debts, after payments of legacies and debts, thus it's ordained. And furthermore, there is another verse that tells you. Now, I said you don't be obsessed with the proportions. That's going to come easier as we go along. But what I need you to be very clear, these proportions are spelled out in the Quran. That's where it is. And the instruction is very clear. Okay? And therefore you're encouraged to do it on a Sharia basis from that point of view. So we're very clear from what I've just covered now, is the Quran actually spells out who should inherit, how much the proportions, how one may inherit. In other words, your inheritance only counts after debts and after legacies and debts. The sequence is settle your debts first, settle your legacy, and then you have the proportions that we're talking about. Only then do you have the proportions. And the males will get twice the females, and let me explain this principle, how one blocks the other one. And the best way to explain that is that if my father's alive and my grandfather's alive, and I pass away, I just said to you, my father will get 1/6, parents will get 1/6. But if my father's predeceased me, then my grandfather steps in his shoes. But if my father's alive and my grandfather's alive, my father being nearer in relation to me eliminates my grandfather. Those nearer in relation eliminates those further in relation. Okay? It's an important principle that comes through every time in the calculation and the proportion calculation. However, even as much as I'm explaining that, again, you can Google this and the answer will just come out for you on that basis. But I think it's important to get a sense of understanding. So effectively, when you have wealth in your personal name, you settle your religious expenses, your debts and taxes. So when we talk about the religious debts, we're talking about you can do your Badul Hajj, your zakah owing, depending on whether you're a Hanafi follower or a Shafi. There's a difference of process there. Kafara, for salahs that you've missed and so on. And then all your taxes and debts. You're then left with an estate. Now the verse says, after legacy and debts, you have your inheritance in terms of the proportions. This is an important concept that Appa was speaking about. Legacy, wasiya, is the Arabic term. Okay? Legacy is a concept unique within an Islamic perspective. We've settled the debts. The verse says, after debts and legacy, you then have the proportions. So what is this legacy? What is this wasiya about? The wasiya is a special arrangement that you can say in your will that I want to leave this as a wasiya, as an amount, and you'll hear people will say sadaqah jariyah, we'll give to the hospital, we'll give to welfare organizations. That is all the concept of a wasiya. That's the concept. So the wasiya has to be settled first before the inheritance is executed, really. Okay? And there's a saying of the Prophet ﷺ that reported in Bukhari that try and do a sadaqah jariyah because it increases your benefit, really, ultimately. So there's hadith to support it, effectively. The verse says after legacies and debts, effectively. So this can be made up of money, and it also can be given to non-Muslims. So if you want to give it to a charitable organization or a Red Cross Children's Hospital that we use in Cape Town, typically, you're allowed to it. But it cannot exceed 1/3 of your estate. Appa mentioned earlier on, there were 3 shares, but you heard the last share was 1/3. The Prophet ﷺ in a hadith reported that it cannot exceed 1/3 of your estate. And the Prophet ﷺ even said, don't be brave and give 1/3 when you have little. In other words, take care of your family first. Don't give, it's up to 1/3, by the way. Not 1/3, it's up to 1/3. So you can give 5%, you can give 10%, 15%. But if your estate is not big, do not be the bravest man and leave your children and family in destitute and wanting to give 1/3 away, effectively. Okay? But you can give 1/3 away. But more importantly, is you can give from this 1/3 to those people who are not your fard Quranic beneficiaries. Now think about that. Those who are alive and who will get out of the estate, whether your father, your mother, whatever the case is, if there are other people, it's not only about charitable organizations. More importantly, if you have any grandchildren of a predeceased child, if you have any children of a predeceased child, those grandchildren most likely in 99% of cases won't be a compulsory heir, won't be a fard heir. Grandchildren don't step in the shoes of the children to inherit. So my daughter's passed away, she's left children, and I pass away. They don't step in the shoes of my daughter to get a share. They can be taken care of through which clause? The wasiya. If you're finding yourself in that situation, please, you cannot use a standard will. The standard will does not have a wasiya clause, or you won't know how to spell out the wasiya clause. Incidentally, if you're a Saudi, if you're a Malaysian, you don't do wills there, because you die by the constitution. The constitutions you die on a Sharia basis. But if you have a wasiya, you will have to put that in writing. Got it? Because the wasiya comes out before the inheritance. So in some cases, in my case, for example, the grandchildren will sit around the table and says, what is there from Nana's estate for us? And the answer is going to be no. And that's not going to be a good situation, effectively. So that's another lesson that you can take away, that the wasiya clause is not only about charitable. It can be used to give to anybody who is not your compulsory heir, your fard heir, effectively. So there's a clause as wasiya, I do these things, you spell that out in the will, effectively. So by now you should know that the Islamic proportions is based on your family. And please know your family well. Because adopted children are not children. A stepchild to you is not a child in your estate from a Sharia point of view. A child born out of wedlock is not a child for purpose of the 2-to-1 ratio. How do you cater for them? Answer is the wasiya clause. If you're finding yourself in that situation, you've got to acknowledge it, and you've got to tell the planner of the will, no, this child is an adopted child. Because when the alim certifies it, he looks at the date of marriage, he looks at the date of the birth of the children, and he says something is not right here, are you with me? And so on and so on. And then the child will be excluded, and then you have more drama than you ever thought of. Okay. And I've explained the adopted principle. Ex-wives also are not compulsory heirs, but they can all be taken through the wasiya clause. So effectively, there's your estate in this example of 5 million. What's my time? 10 minutes. Okay, fine. 5 million. You decided to give 1 million as a wasiya. You're left with 4 million. Now we're going to handle the 4 million in terms of the Quranic verses. And the Quranic verses are split up into 2 categories. We call it the fixed shares and the residual. We're now going to discuss the Quranic heirs, fixed and residual. Those who must always get, and again, don't be obsessed with the ratios, but I want to give you a sense of it. You can Google it, and you'll see we're going to do some examples quickly, and we'll see. This is in relation to the deceased. In other words, the wife has died and she left a Sharia will, then the husband will always get a quarter when there are children from that marriage, or half if there are no children. That's what the husband. If the husband had died, the wives, as Romana said earlier on, share 1/4 if there are no children, but 1/8 if there are children. That's why we always say 1/8. These are all from the verses, by the way. I'm just giving you the 4 simple ones. If you have only daughters and one of the parents died, then they will get half if there's one daughter only. And 2/3 if there's more than 2 and they share that. The father always gets 1/6, the mother gets 1/6, 1/3 if the parents are the only heirs, in other words, there are no children. This is always fixed. If this is not around, then these come into play. Granddaughters, grandfather, grandmother. Please, granddaughters only from a son. Granddaughters only from a son. I think I did say it. Only from sons. Please make a note. Okay, so there we've covered the fixed shares, then the residual shares. Those who must get after the fixed shares have been allocated. And who are they? There's your sons and daughters. So your sons and daughters never have a fixed share. They get the balance shared on a 2-to-1 basis. How do you work it out? If it's 2 sons and 1 daughter, you say 2 plus 1, that's 5. 2 out of 5 is 40, 40 and 20. 40%, 40% and 20%. Okay? If it's 2 daughters and 1 son, you'll say 2, 1, 1. So 50% to the son and 25 to the daughters. That's how you work it out very simply. So you have a sense now what the proportions are, really. Okay, so I told you there are various sites you can go to, and that will be in the slides that you can look up. So I'm not sure if you'll be able to see, but I'm going to do some examples quickly because I think I've got about 5 minutes left. In this case, the wife is alive, the husband has died, wife is alive, 1 son, 2 daughters, and parents. I'm going to go through this quickly. The wife is alive, the wife gets 1/8 because they are children. The mother 1/6, 1/6, happy? Right? Because that's what the verse said. And the balance goes 2 to 1. 2, 1, 1. Okay, you all happy with that one? Right. Second example, wife, 2 daughters and deceased brother. 2 daughters and deceased brother. No sons, in other words. The wife is alive, got children, 1/8. The 2 daughters, remember, share 2/3. 2/3. Watch this. The brother of the deceased comes into play through the residual clause. So if you have only daughters, it's possible in relation to the deceased, the brother or sister of the deceased will inherit, and in this case, 20%. And you know what they say to me, my brother should never inherit any, that's okay. So please make a plan. Okay? And this plan is very simple. Plan is very simple. Okay? Plan is very simple. When you have that situation and you don't want them to be part of very important assets, all you say in the clause, if any of them are around, pay them out in cash. Khalas. Pay them out in cash. That's at least you're not creating problems that they can have a share of the house or you can have a share of the business or whatever the case is. Okay? But that's what happens. Okay. Next one. Wife, 2 daughters, son predeceased, leaving a son. Son predeceased, leaving a son. Wife, 2 daughters. The wife inherits 12.5%. The 2 daughters 33. The predeceased son of a son, he gets the balance there. Okay? This case is very interesting. Wife, 1 son, 1 daughter. The other daughter is predeceased, leaving a son. Remember, there were 2 daughters. The other daughter is predeceased, leaving a son. The wife gets 12.5% because there's still a child, a daughter. The daughter gets the son, 1 son, 1 daughter, so it's 2 to 1. Okay? 7, 12, 7, 24. Right? But the son of the daughter doesn't get anything. That's what I want to show you. Can I go through that one again? Wife is alive. Son, 1 son is alive, 1 daughter is alive. A daughter has predeceased, leaving 1 son. Got it? The wife gets 1/8 because they are children. The son and the daughter share the balance 2 to 1. The son of the predeceased daughter does not inherit because of the presence of a son. The son is nearer in relation to the grandson from the daughter. How do you take care of the granddaughter, son? Wasiya. Don't have to shake your head. You can take care of him, the wasiya. Okay?
My name is Wasiya. Just saying it. My legacy, and then you can do it.
Okay, so let me tell you quickly, what is the biggest challenge in the world? This is the biggest challenge. Take this message home. In this case, there's 1.2 million rand. There's a wife, a son, and a daughter. Happy? Well, you know the ratios. The wife will get 1/8 because they are children. The son will get 2 to 1, 1, 1. You all follow that? There's money in the bank. Money. Okay? Money is easy divisible. Money is easy divisible. Money and near money is easy divisible. Money and unit trust with al-barak and so on is easy divisible. What's the problem now? There's a house. There's a house of a million rand. There's a car. There's an investment. Same total. Same ratios. Same proportions. Who gets what for the share? Who gets what for the share? The wife must get 150,000. What must she get of this for the 150,000? That is the biggest challenge for us to sort out Sharia estates. You need to talk about that beforehand. The spouse, for example, half the house can be transferred to the spouse to secure her. You can create a user front. You can say, the son, you're going to get your share, but you're going to get in the car because you haven't got a car. Try and reduce the problem. Do not leave your problems to the executors. Another message. Do not leave your problems to the executors. If you have not cooperating children and not talking children, the executors don't have a magic wand to solve that problem. Okay, please. This is the biggest challenge for us, and this holds up the estate more than 2 years. Because people can't agree. This property is so valuable. My father and my grandfather were born in the building. How can you decide to sell it? Money is easy divisible. This is the biggest problem. So now you multiply this into businesses that your husband runs. And the one son is in the business, and the others say we want to have a share because Sharia-wise we can have a share. Now you see the challenges. Your other son is an American. He says South Africa is burning. What the hell? Sell up everything and just give me money. Okay. Okay. I just want to give you costs. Effectively, there are death costs that Romana was speaking. If your estate is about 3.5 million rand, nothing. About 5 million rand, 500,000, 10 million, 2 million, 20 million, 5 million. That's based on the assets on the day of your death. Okay. So I will need to get to a few points. Okay. So most ladies will come to me and says, we can't see ourselves getting the 1/8 really. Okay. Organize yourself while your husband's alive. You've been a contributor to the wealth indirectly, effectively, and we say that openly. In some cases, the spouses even pay the fees, and we know many of our daughters are now qualified and chartered accountants and doctors and so on. Keep a record of all those expenses because they are a claim against his estate. And they come out as a liability, as a debt first. Think about that. All those kind of things that you are contributing so willingly, and maybe you should stop doing it out of love now, and start recording it, but seriously. When you come to us, it's too late because the master is going to ask for proof of all these things. Okay. So if you are contributing, there's nothing wrong in contributing, but decide, do you do it out of love or this is a loan? Keep records because you can do it in your lifetime, improve the position, renew your vows, get another dowry. Are you with me? These are all practical issues. Engage your muftis on these things. You can improve it. Create a user front over the house. The house is normally the biggest problem because the mother or the wife is worried if she's going to be kicked out or whatever the case is. Because remember, we talked about 1/8. Although they can't do it in terms of property, you need everybody's consent. But you know what? Doing it and not doing it on the paper but eating your head is another problem. So rather, know your family. Do what you have to do in your lifetime. Do not leave your problem for us. Look, the important thing about this is that you need to keep money available for these death costs. Because otherwise some assets are going to be sold. An insurance policy, a life policy is permissible for these death costs. Most of your husbands would have taken a life policy but made you the beneficiary. That doesn't help the money in the estate. Because you're going to change your mind because you're going to say, I'm getting 1/8. I'm not bringing the money to the table. That's what you're going to do. The policy must be payable to the estate to sort out the policy costs. Okay, when you have a trust, all I want to say to you, if any of you have a trust, please go home and tell your spouse that you want to be a trustee on your trust. The assets are your family's assets. That's the first point. Do not let the extended family control the trust. That's the first point. And the second point is, please give clear instructions what happens on the death of the planner. It's not in the trust deed. Do you want Sharia rules to apply or not? Or do you want to do some arrangements in your lifetime about the trust? In other words, I allocate 20% of these assets already to my spouse, and therefore 80% must be dealt with in a on a Sharia basis, not in a will, in a letter to them. Okay, I think I need you to make a note of this word PICS. Well, I'll be done in 1 minute. PICS. Please take this word home, PICS. What is the plan? P. I. Where's all the information? Information. Have we communicated to the executors? Have we communicated to the family? Have we communicated with the accountant what's going to happen? K, have we got knowledge of the process we just spoken about? How things are going to work? What's the death cost? And where's the money going to come from? And so on. And lastly, please do not forget there's a spiritual dimension to the passing of the wealth, as Appa has indicated earlier on. As we say, we're totally independent. We're not linked, Rumana and our companies. We're totally independent. When we give you advice, we're not linked to an insurance company. We don't give investment advice. And you should be in good hands because you're getting independent advice. We also on our website have a personal estate document that you can populate with information. In other words, what's the VIN number of the car? Where are the title deeds? Who's the insurance policy with? Really. Please make the process very expeditiously by preparing these things. We start with this almost from scratch when somebody dies, and therefore it goes beyond 2 years. So shukran jazakallah for that, and I trust that was informative. Shukran.
Jazakallah, I think you'll agree with me that that was most informative and brought down to the layperson's understanding. So every one of you sitting here, even if you don't have a background in finance or tax or accounting or legalities, would have understood that, and it was so simple.